Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to another Esoterica live stream. I like to do these every few weeks just to touch base with folks in the community and folks watching, and talk about recent content. We've had a lot of stuff going on here on the channel. The big thing that's been going on recently, of course, is the new Merkavah Mysticism class, which has been a lot of fun. I really have thoroughly enjoyed getting this Merkavah Mysticism class off the ground. I've been threatening to do it for a couple of years, and it's really taken a lot of work to make it happen. But I'm glad that we were able to get it going, and it's already getting longer than I thought it would be. And I introduced a whole new lecture on the Apostle Paul, which will be probably not this time, but the next cycle through. We'll get to the relationship of Merkavah mysticism, or at least Merkavah mysticism, proto-Merkavah mysticism with the Apostle Paul. So we'll be looking at that material, and then going on. I mean, it's really going to be an pretty extensive course. It's really going to go as long as it needs to go. If it has to go, the Agrippa course ended up going for 14 sessions. I think this Merkavah series will go at least that long, maybe longer. And just looking forward to getting into that material and really just diving into it. I think it's fantastically interesting stuff, and I think it's had a larger impact than people realize. And so part of really explaining how that it's gotten to be how it's had that impact is we can only really show that by actually getting into the material. So it's going to be a long, hopefully pretty in-depth class. But many thanks to the patrons of this channel for making the Merkavah videos possible. Also here to take questions if folks have had questions on the Merkavah literature. What's great about doing this on Patreon is that I get to interact directly with folks in the class the day that I give the lecture, but not everybody can do the Patreon thing. And so I want to make sure that at least during these live streams, that if folks have specific questions about Merkavah mysticism, then you can ask them here, and I'll try to get to them as I can. But what else have we been doing in the channel? I feel like this has been a pretty long creation cycle. I try to do these live streams every 3 weeks. So basically I'll create 3 videos and do a live stream. But what have we been working on? We got, I did the episode on Isaac Calcibon, and Isaac Calcibon and the famous or infamous business where he attempts to show that the Hermetica is a fraud. Of course, he kind of overpendulates the Hermetica, of course, was not a fraud. It was a historically composed text during the Roman period, the first couple centuries of the Common Era, and it was an interesting text. It's the kind of thing that I have read a ton about. So you read, and every time you read something about the Hermetica, they mention Isaac Calcibon, but not many people actually go back and just really read what he wrote. And it was fascinating because I went through and actually looked at the Catholic writer Bonario, who he is referencing. And by looking at Bonario, what's fascinating, I should have brought the book up, I have a copy downstairs actually, is that Bonario only talks about Hermes Trismegistus for like 2 sentences. It's like 2 sentences where he talks about Hermes Trismegistus. And what's wild is that Isaac Calcibon becomes so obsessed with this argument that he ultimately ends up writing 17 pages worth of forensic analysis of the Corpus Hermeticum to show that it dates to a later time period, and he takes it to be a fraudulent text. Me and basically no other scholars believe that, but it was cool to dive into the Isaac Calcibon stuff. It was really cool that I could reach out to the British Library, and they would send me a couple pictures of his actual book. It's really, again, fascinating that you can just go into the British Library, and with the right credentials, you can just waltz in there and pick up the very book that Isaac Calcibon used to radically transform our understanding of the Hermetica. And that is just a fantastic resource just that exists in the world. And so yeah, it's absolutely fascinating, stuff. What else did we do? Did an episode on alchemy where I talked about some of the forms that we think transmutation may have happened. Of course, chemical transmutation is impossible, but we have all these transmutation stories that abound in alchemical literature, and not only transmutation tales, but we even have examples of alchemical gold that have survived, and those are completely fascinating. These pieces of alchemical gold that have survived, and if we test all of them, and we've tested all of them, and we can look at some of these stories about how this alchemical gold was made, and we can basically form a forensic picture about how transmutation allegedly happened in the crucibles of the alchemists. So it was a lot of fun to work through all of the different possibilities around how transmutation happened, or transmutation happened, and how it could be faked. And it's really cool to look at not only how could it happen, but also how could it be faked. And I think that one of the really fascinating things about some of the surviving alchemical gold that has come down to us to this day is that we can take that and analyze it. It's not gold, obviously. It looks like gold, but we can analyze it, and we can actually get a good sense of how they would have generated that piece of alchemical gold. And it's fascinating to be able to reconstruct that stuff. Of course, that's the kind of forensic work that you find in people like Dr. Principe and William Newman and other folks who are active chemists working in those areas. I have a lot of respect for Dr. Principe. I actually was just emailing with him the other day about getting a custom alembic blown. He has a guy that blows all of his alembics using laboratory grade glass, because the alembic that I have, the little glass alembic that I have, is not made with borosilicate glass, and kind of feel unusual about kind of feel wary of using it. So I'm going to get a professional one made, actually out of laboratory grade glass, so that next time I do a forensic reconstruction of an alchemical of an alchemical procedure, which I have one picked out, by the way. I'm going to be doing one. I'm going to be doing one on extracted from Nicholas Culpeper's famous book. It's actually a precursor to absinthe, and we'll be recreating it. Actually, I need to order the stuff from Mountain Rose Herbs. I could maybe even use some of the wormwood I've been growing. I have some wormwood that I've planted, and it's growing in the back in our garden, so I might be able to use some of that. So a couple of folks in the chat that I'd say hi to. It's Vera, my friend Vera, and Marco Visconti. It's good to see you, Marco. Got the distinct privilege and honor of getting to look at a little bit at, I haven't had the chance to read through it yet, but of Marco's new book, which from what I've looked at really looks fantastic. I really appreciate Marco's re-understanding of Thelema, which is a philosophy that gets a bad rap because it becomes so associated with kind of Crowleyanity. Crowley becomes the object of a bunch of young guys trying to ape Crowley and doing it terribly. But I like the fact that what Marco's done is to not decenter Crowley. There's no way of decentering him. He's the elephant in the room. He's the bull in the china cabinet. But I like the fact that it's really focusing on the philosophy of Thelema and the spiritual goals of Thelema, which is, to me, far more fascinating than the, let's call it, colorful life that Aleister Crowley lived, which is also fascinating. But you can get all that from Kaczynski's book if you really want all that stuff. It's a new book. Folks are wondering. It's a new book coming out by Marco Visconti. That's coming out later this year. I'm sure, Marco. Marco, feel free to promote yourself in the chat if you want to throw a link to the pre-orders, because those are important, folks. I should say, just as a thing for folks, if you see an author that you like and they make pre-orders available for their book, whether it's on Amazon or whatever mechanism by which you order your books, always make sure to do a pre-order if you can, because pre-orders really dramatically affect how a book is going to be received, how it gets basically set into the algorithm, how publishers evaluate the success of an author has so much to do with that stuff. So yeah, make sure you pre-order it if you can. Marco, feel free to throw that link to your pre-order your new book in the chat if you like. but yeah, I got to do the the alchemy episode. I think I've said this before on the channel that alchemy is kind of my first esoteric love. The first bit of esotericism that I ever discovered was alchemy. And I remember finding Adam McLean's website when I was a teenager, and really getting into that stuff, and really really loving that material. And yeah, it kind of went from there. I think from alchemy to John Dee, and then from John Dee to the Enochian stuff, and Enochian stuff. Well, you can sort of spiral if you want um, from that material. So always happy to do some work on alchemy. And what else did we work on recently? We did an episode on early Kabbalah. This really great introduction to Kabbalah in the sense of specifically the Christian Kabbalah, and it was really great to be able to work on some of the material from Mercurius von Helmont, who was a fascinating character. But he wrote this really fantastic introduction to Christian Kabbalah, which I argued, and I think I would stand by this argument, that in many ways, because von Helmont, he kind of flipped the script on how Christian Kabbalah had been working till then. Prior to that, with people like Pico and Reuchlin, the idea basically was to accommodate Kabbalah to Christianity. That is to say, to use Kabbalah to justify Christianity. What von Helmont did was flip that over and made it so that in many ways he wanted Christians to convert to Kabbalah. And now, not to abandon their belief in Jesus and stuff and Christ, but to ultimately take on the metaphysics of Lurianic Kabbalah, specifically things like reincarnation and the idea that the world evil entered into the world through the Klipot and all this sort of stuff. So what's interesting is that by flipping that over, I made the argument, and I would stand by it, that in many ways he decoupled the stranglehold that Christianity had on Kabbalah by prioritizing the Lurianic Kabbalah, and that basically set Kabbalah loose. And by setting Kabbalah loose, that allowed for the possibility of what we might call occult Kabbalah or Hermetic Kabbalah, such that you might have a Kabbalah detangled from both Judaism and from Christianity, and that detangled Kabbalah would be able to basically get wings of its own and become an independent spiritual tradition. So that's the cool thing about what von Helmont did. Now, I don't know how conscious he was of having done that, although he was arrested by the Inquisition and tortured for a while. So he must have known something, that he was doing something interesting. At least the Inquisition was more than happy to remind him that he was doing something interesting. But at any rate, what he did was, I think, pretty fascinating, and yeah, well worth researching. And again, it's a fascinating little book, super fascinating stuff with Mercurius von Helmont. But as I mentioned, the big deal on the channel, or the big thing on the channel now, is this course on Merkavah mysticism. I should also show people my shirt. These are great shirts, by the way. If you want to get one, it's Hildegard. I got to do a fit check like Dan McClellan. It's a Hildegard shirt, which is a bit confusing wearing a yarmulke and sporting a Hildegard of Bingen shirt, because it's not really clear what team you're on. But I'm definitely on team Hildegard. Hildegard would be a great mascot for a sports team. The Raging Hildegards, because I think Hildegard's a pretty metal name. Actually, it's one of those medieval German names that means something like battle something. There's all these battle ready. There's all these names like Clotilde and Hildegard, and that these are mild mannered people having these absolutely badass names. To go back to take a break from Hildegard, but go back to the Merkavah class. I really do want to make the argument, and I've been making it, that the Merkavah mysticism is going to have a huge impact on the development of Western esotericism, and it's an impact that I don't think many people have fully appreciated, mostly because the Merkavah mysticism people are kind of siloed in their little Merkavah mysticism world. The Schaefer and Wolfson and and those folks are kind of in that world of Merkavah stuff, and the occult people are in their world of occult stuff, but they're not talking to each other. And I happen to be the unlucky SOB in the middle, where I am interested in and deeply interested in the Merkavah mysticism, and obviously also interested in the history of occultism. And I can see very clearly how Merkavah stuff makes its way into Western esotericism, whether it's literally texts like the Shior Koma ending up in the Summa Sacra Magici of Bernard Gunnell. That's a place where literally it shows up in the SSM, but also I would say that the concept of the holy guardian angel as it appears in the Abramelin may, in fact, I may say even more than that, likely has its origin in the Sartora literature. So I think that we can see the development of the holy guardian angel in the Abramelin. I do think that it's going to be inside. We'll find it in some ways. A version of it emerges from the Sartora literature. So I think that this is a very fruitful place to really get our hands into the Merkavah mysticism, and to show that the Merkavah mysticism actually has very long legs, very deep roots in supporting the superstructure of very early European esotericism. And I'm really excited to get to that material toward the end of the course. So yeah, that's stuff that I'm really interested in getting into. Oh, one other thing, I should mention this, and maybe I'll put out a poll about this to see what people think. My apologies. I'm in a different room. As you can see, my office is actually in the process of getting worked on, and I apologize. This room actually has air conditioning, so if you hear the air conditioning hum, I apologize for it. But one of the things I'm actually doing is I reached out to the Stanley Hotel. I don't know if folks know the Stanley Hotel. The Stanley Hotel is the hotel that The Shining is based on. In fact, Stephen King visited the Stanley and ultimately came up with the Shining from staying in the Stanley. But I reached out to the Stanley. I did a Bruce Con with them. I actually hung out with Bruce Campbell and did some of that stuff. Yeah, it's the basis for the Overlook Hotel. And one of the things that I want to do, I reach out to the Stanley because one of the things I want to do is actually do an Esoterica weekend learning at the Stanley. Wouldn't that be cool to like all of us stay, or a lot of us stay at the Stanley and like do learning during the day, do tech studies. I'll bring some old books. You can see, original copies of Agrippa and stuff. I'll have a little mini museum. You can actually physically handle the books and see them. And then we'll do learning. And then folks, if you're all about supernatural stuff, if you're a believer in supernatural stuff and ghosts and all that, then you could stay up late at night and roam around the Stanley and see if you don't bump into something that goes bump in the night. But at any rate, this is an idea I've had, and I'm going to pitch it to the Stanley. I'm waiting to hear back from them. But if they think it's cool and you guys think it's cool, it's the kind of thing that we might try to make happen. So it's an idea. I think it would be cool to like all meet at the Stanley, have like an esotericon kind of thing, do some group learning, have some drinks, see some ghosts, all of that. So anyway, that's an idea I have. Maybe that'll happen. Maybe it won't. I hope that it does. I think it'd be pretty cool. So, but anyway, it's an idea. All right, let's see what's going on with the Merkavah stuff. I'm going to take some questions here in just a minute. So feel free to get those in the chat. I'll start answering questions in just a minute. But yeah, what's the direction that the Merkavah class is going to take? The main thing that we're working through now is the apocalyptic literature. There'll be another lecture on the apocalyptic this week, followed by a lecture on Paul as a kind of proto-Merkavah mystic, which I've kind of done an episode on. And so you can check that out. And then we got to get into the rabbinical literature. We have to get into the rabbinical literature, and that is actually turning into a whole big thing. it's funny. Last night I was literally at. I take Thursday nights off. I go to a local bar here called Bumbo's, and I was at Bumbo's literally reading the Tosefta, like on Safaria on my phone, reading the Tosefta at the bar, and it was this very surreal moment where I'm realizing, like, I'm just sitting here drinking, you know, quince brandy, like studying the Tosefta at a bar. It was bizarre. I don't know. It felt bizarre. So at any rate, we'll get into the rabbinical literature, and then we'll be really firmly in the world of the Hechelot for many weeks, for several weeks, and really get into that world. So yeah, I'm looking forward to it. I think it's gonna be great. Also, I should mention that this week I had a great conversation. It's Dan, the modern hermeticist, in the chat. Good to see you, Dan. I got your syllabus, man. I'm looking over it. I'll let you know. I'll let you know what I think when I get it read. But yeah, I had a great conversation this week with David Litwa, who's a fantastic scholar of Hermeticism and Gnosticism. So we had a chat on Hermeticism and Gnosticism, the Gospel of Thomas. He has a new book out that's sort of an introduction to the Gospel of Thomas. And it was great to chat with him. So that video is on the channel if you have the time to check it out. Also, I guess the last thing I'll mention is sort of housekeeping stuff, is that I had a lot of people ask me about turning on the memberships option here on YouTube, and because some people don't want to use Patreon or whatever. I mean, but I did turn on the memberships option on Patreon on YouTube. So if you do want to support the channel via the memberships option, I turned on one for like $4.99 a month, and you'll get early access to videos and stuff like that. But again, I always tell people, supporting the channel is a thing that if you can do it, great. But if you can't, or you don't feel like it, don't, it's not going to change anything. Everything will always be freely accessible. Everything will always be, open source, no mid-roll ads. I don't plan on changing any of that. But I noticed some folks just asked if I turn it on. So I turned it on. If you want to use it, great. If not, whatever. I saw a couple of folks did become members, so I appreciate that. Thank you. Yeah, the Kraken. I'll throw this up. Thank you for the super sticker. Yeah, I couldn't call it Esotericon because there's another event called Esotericon that I've actually spoken at. So I wouldn't want to steal their. I wouldn't want to steal their name, but anyway, maybe we don't call it anything. Maybe we call it Esoterica at the Stanley, Esoterica at the Overlook. But yeah, I'm like I said, I'm going to be talking to the folks at the Stanley and see if we can make that happen. And if we can, basically you could just book a room at the Stanley, and I'll probably have some kind of little thing so I can make a little cheddar, and mostly just be sort of a long form hangout at the Stanley Hotel. All right, folks. Let me grab some questions up here. Yeah, Chariot Con, that's a good one. But no, and what I do is, for folks who are coming, I try to, make the weekend course, it'd be like a seminar course, a pretty intensive seminar course. And ultimately I would try to, pick it so that, it would be what's most interesting to the people coming. So I give basically a menu, and folks could vote from the menu what they want to do. So that would be the idea. But anyway, I haven't heard back from the Stanley yet. I wrote them. We'll see what they say, and if we can make it happen, we can make it happen. All right, so let's go get a couple questions here. What apocalyptic material made it into rabbinical Judaism? Well, there's definitely apocalyptic material in Jewish mysticism in the form of Kabbalah. So Kabbalah has pretty deep apocalyptic roots. I mean, basic concepts: angels, demons, Messiah. Anytime dualism creeps into Judaism, that's an example of apocalyptic thinking. The idea of focusing on the idea of the end of the world, the afterlife, the idea of Olam Haba, the world to come. These are all apocalyptic ideas. They're not indigenous to Israelite religion, and so they all come in. They all come into Judaism via the apocalyptic revolution. So in many ways, I would say that Judaism just is Israelite religion transformed by the apocalyptic. The apocalyptic is what transforms Israelite religion in response, especially to the destruction of the temple. May it be rebuilt in some way that's not going to cause World War III. And but anyways, I think I said this in the it's kind of a joke, but Israelite religion goes into the Babylonian exile, and ultimately Judaism comes out, and it's the apocalyptic transformation of that process that really generates Judaism, or Judaisms, as we know it. Although that by the Second Temple period, not every form of Judaism was apocalyptic. Of course, you have the conservative old Sadducees, and they did not get on board with the apocalypticism stuff. Are there traces of Merkavah in Freemasonry? I have to say that I don't know a ton about Freemasonry, so I can't say. I don't know. I would be doubtful that much Merkavah mysticism makes its way into Freemasonry, because most of Merkavah mysticism, outside of very small circles of rabbis and very elite circles of a very tiny group of scholars, most Merkavah mysticism wasn't even known prior to the 1980s. And so with Freemasonry being a fraternal organization going back to the 18th century, my guess is that they spent most of their time not knowing about the Merkavah literature. So I doubt it. I would doubt it. But that doesn't mean you can't put it in there now. You can certainly put it in there now. What industries did you work in before going into academia? I worked in tech. A good friend Phil owned a tech company, so I did tech stuff. In fact, all my friends growing up, we all did tech stuff. We all like, programming stuff in C and C++ and like QBasic to like, character generators for Dungeons and Dragons. That was like the world that I grew up in. And I still remember learning QBasic on old 3D6. And even now I'm teaching myself 6502 assembly, which I think the 6502 just turned 50, by the way. So happy birthday 6502, the 6502. But yeah, I worked in tech. I still like, a lot of the content that I consume on YouTube is actually tech oriented. I like the 8-bit guy. I like there's a channel of a guy building an 8-bit computer from scratch. I love that stuff. So my mind is very and this sounds hilarious, that when I want to relax, I watch tutorials on 6502 assembly. So something about that technical, just moving, data around in memory addresses. It helps to calm my nerves after a day of reading, crazy Merkavah mysticism stuff in Aramaic. 6502 assembly helps to relax me. But yeah, I worked in tech. It made me a bit of a Luddite. I would still consider myself a bit of a Luddite. And that has not changed. I think working in tech can make you a Luddite. But all my friends now work in tech. All my friends growing up, at least, they all work in tech. All right. Thoughts on pseudo-Dionysian, being a fraud? Does it damage all future Christian thought or enhance it? I don't think that the fact that it's not written by Dionysius the Areopagite, look, it doesn't really matter who writes this stuff. I'm a big fan of the death of the author. It doesn't matter who wrote this stuff. It doesn't matter whether or not Matthew really wrote Matthew, or Paul really wrote whatever, or the Hermetica was really written in the days of Pharaoh before the flood. The truth of the matter is someone wrote them. They're in the wild. They're out there. The ideas have their own life. They're moving about in the world. And at the end of the day, that they are pseudepigrapha just doesn't interest me. Now, the world of pseudepigrapha as a sociological thing is interesting, but that they claim to be written by X, Y, and Z, I just don't think that it matters. Also, I think it's a hang-up we have, that we have this like bourgeois hypersensitivity to intellectual property. It's that property part that really, really concerns us. And that's sort of a thing really beginning in the 17th century with the great bourgeois revolutions. And that idea of intellectual property as a thing that's mine, That's a really, really modern capitalistic thing that in the late classical world, it didn't really exist in the same kind of way. Even in some aspects of the early modern world, it really didn't exist. So I think it's a preoccupation that we have that has nothing to do with the legitimacy, or in some sense, even the authenticity of these works as pseudepigrapha. So I think it has, I think that our desire to indict a text because of who is alleged to have written it or whatever, I think that's a modern hookup. It's a modern hang up, rather. It's a modern hang up, and not one that I think would have bothered in people in antiquity, and frankly, not one that I think that we should be overly bothered about. Any books on the phenomenology of vision experiences? The book that comes to mind is, I think, the work of Katz, K-A-T-Z, who's written on the phenomenology of mysticism, and I think also the phenomenology of vision experiences. So let me check real fast just to make sure I'm not telling you a fib. So the phenomenology of mystical experience, I think it's by Katz. That's a great book called Phenomenology of Mysticism. Yeah, this is one of the books I was thinking about by Anthony Steinbach. So this is a good book that I would check out. Throw a link in the chat. But I think Katz also has a book on phenomenology and mysticism. Person to ask, of course, would be Zevi, but he's not here right now. But I'm sure he would know exactly. So why is the chariot motif so prevalent in so many religious traditions, even long after chariots stopped being used? Well, this is a great question. It's because they maintain their prestige. The chariot remained a symbol, a powerful symbol of power, a symbol of sovereignty, a symbol of kingship. And so because it maintained that symbolic power, the idea of a king being in a chariot persisted. So symbolism can long outlast any kind of historical reality, and this is just a place where the symbolism of the chariot was far more powerful than actual chariots, it turned out, and therefore the symbolism of the chariot long outlived the actual use of chariots. All right. It's Genghis Galahad. It's good to see you back. Would you consider offering fun optional digital certificates along the lines of edX? I guess I could. I mean, that they're useless, and I don't know that anybody would. I'm not sure that anyone would. I'm not sure I could vet that you completed the course, nor do I imagine that anyone would take a certificate like that seriously. In fact, this is a sort of a funny thing. When I see certificates of completion by non-accredited institutions, I take the person less seriously than I would if they didn't have a certificate. There's something about about certification, certain kinds of certification that come off as like really phony. And so I think any certification I would give you would come across to anyone worth their salt as somehow more phony than just not having it. Or another way of putting this, if someone gave me a certification from, I don't know, Peterson University or whatever it is that JP is doing these days, I would not take that terribly seriously. But if John Vervaeke were to write me an email and say, hey, this person is really smart, they took some classes with me, they did this thing, and I think highly of them, you would be golden in my book. If John Vervaeke vouches for you, then you're good. You're good to go, because I trust John. He's a really great guy, smart. And so in many ways, the certificate would not do the work that just a short email, like literally from someone like John Vervaeke, would do. So yeah, that's why I would be reticent to do it, because I wouldn't want to give you something that I wouldn't take seriously. Yeah, does that make sense? Yeah, thanks some folks for coming. members of the channel. Like I said, this is totally totally a optional thing if you want to, but I do appreciate it. Let's see. Yeah, thank you, Bishop Sleeves. It's very kind of you to say so. I appreciate the super sticker. Appreciate that. Thank you. Thank you also for becoming a member of the channel. Folks can do that if they like. Yeah, Jaro 77. Thank you also for becoming a member. No, I'm glad folks are excited about the idea of doing the Stanley idea. Yeah, I'm glad folks like that idea. I really hope it, like I said, I hope it can work out, and it'd be cool to be able to do, like I said, Esoterica at the Stanley. It's just a perfect fit. It's just a perfect fit. Any upcoming videos on Gersonides? I don't have any videos coming up on Gersonides. He's really not much of an esotericist. I like Gersonides. I think he's probably one of the most heretical Jewish philosophers ever. His philosophy is deeply influenced by Averroes, and I like Averroes a lot. And I find Gersonides to be a pretty radical, maybe one of the most radical philosophers of the Middle Ages. And his book Milkamot Hashem is just fantastic. It's really, really a good book, but it's not terribly esoteric, I guess. One of the things I do want to do, and I was talking about this when conversation earlier with office hours with patrons, is that I want to do an episode on the active intellect, because one of the most important ideas in the Middle Ages is the concept of the agent intellect or the active intellect, and it's just ubiquitous in the Middle Ages. And it doesn't exist now. Most people have never heard of it, but it was one of the strangest and most powerful ideas in the Middle Ages, and everybody believed in some version of it. And that is, I think, a really important esoteric idea. And Gersonides does deal with the active intellect to some degree. And so, in fact, all of our souls for Gersonides are just the active intellect. We don't have individual souls. In this way, he's a bit like the radical Averroists, like Sigurd of Brabant and people like that. Well, it's not clear that Sigurd of Brabant believed that either. But anyway, he was an Averroist and he got kicked out of Paris for it. Although Dante did put him in heaven in the Paradiso. Sigurd of Brabant is up there. At any rate, but yeah, Gersonides isn't terribly esoteric, but maybe as part of an episode on the agent intellect, that'd be cool to do. Yeah, I do want to do an episode on esoteric Latter-day Saint stuff, esoteric Mormonism. That is an episode I do want to do. I've been actually reading through what's the name of the biography of Joseph Smith? Like No Man Knows My History. It's a pretty famous biography. It's one of the earliest sort of non-confessional biographies of Joseph Smith. I've been working my way through that, and I want to read the newer one. And of course, I need to read The Magic in the Mormon Worldview, which is I haven't read it yet. It's huge. But yeah, I do want to do that. I have a long-standing interest in the Latter-day Saints movement. I just find the Latter-day Saints to be a fascinating version of like American esoteric spirituality. In fact, I would argue that they're the single largest esoteric spiritual movement in this country, in the United States. And but most of their temple ceremony elements are brought in from Freemasonry. And have been since removed. My understanding is in the late 70s, a lot of the explicitly, sort of like that kind of stuff was cut out and is no longer in the temple ceremony. To my understanding, it was removed in the 1970s, but the early stuff is definitely all brought over from Freemasonry. But yeah, I'm looking forward to. I'm going to go to Utah, and I think 2027 when the new temple is the big temple in Salt Lake is going to be before it's consecrated. I want to go tour it, and I've been told that by Dan McClellan that he'll give me a tour and we'll hang out and get to hang out with Dan, and maybe we'll do some recording and stuff together. He's a great guy. Thank you. So yeah, in Hechelet Rabati, there's a you have to show me the. Can you? I mean, it could. I mean, there's a. Yeah, I need to see the synopsis where about the angels spiking things with wine, because like lots of people put lots of things in wine in late antiquity. I mean, the Romans sweetened their wine with lead. Egyptians put blue lotus in their wine. You know, people put all kinds of things in wine. But I need to see the exact quotation in the synopsis about where that gets mentioned, because I want to look it up in Hechelet Rabati. But thank you for the super question. All right. Will you ever get a video on Carl Jung? Very unlikely. Mostly just because he's too contemporary. I don't really do contemporary stuff. Not to say that Carl Jung's not important. Of course, he's incredibly important for contemporary esotericism, but you know, he's 20th century. I really don't work in the 20th century. I might do an episode on his interpretation of alchemy, maybe at some point, but I don't find his interpretation of alchemy to be, I mean, to me, frankly, terribly interesting, just because it has nothing to do with historical alchemy. Jung pretty badly cherry picked the data to get what he wanted, to fit his theory that alchemy was at some level fundamentally about his theory of individuation, psychological individuation. But the truth of the matter is he very selectively picked which documents he looked at in order to get that. And that just strikes me as methodologically dishonest. Like he really liked Gerald Dorn and stuff like that. And so that kind of intellectual dishonesty on his part, where he's clearly going to alchemy to get what he wants from it, as opposed to studying it systematically and historically. I just don't have much time for that. I don't have a lot of respect for it. Now, of course, it's been incredibly influential, but that it's been influential doesn't make it right, and doesn't make it historically accurate, and doesn't even make it a correct reading of the text he was looking at. So I don't know. It's people really love Jung. I think he was a genius. And I think like lots of geniuses, there's a pretty good dose of fraud in there. And I'll say that about my guy. I'm a Lacanian. I love Lacan. I think Lacan gets a lot of stuff right. I also think Lacan was a charlatan half the time. So it's not like, Lacan's free of the charges I would lay at the feet of Jung. So no one's innocent here. But in that way, I just feel like he doesn't really add anything to the conversation about alchemy. It's really a conversation about Jung and his theories of individuation. So it's not really a lot for me to do in terms of focusing on himself. And of course, his Gnostic stuff is really fascinating. I will say that stuff is, I think, really fascinating. Yeah, thank you, The Ant, for becoming a member. I appreciate that. From a weakling fan, are you familiar with the Spirit? Yes, I am familiar with the Spirit. It's a little more doomy for me. I'm not really a big fan of like doom metal. It's a bit more doomy. So it's not really not really my speed, but glad to see the post weakling days of stuff is really, really good, doing well. Is there a direct or a testable connection between apocalyptic traditions like the Merkavah and the Solomonic Goetic practices? There is not a direct, testable connection, which is to say, there is no Merkavah text that says, hey, like the books of influenced us. And there's no books of text saying, yeah, we got this from Jews going into other dimensions to see their God. What there is a field of ascent technologies that seem to exist in the late classical world. And this field of ascent technologies, of which there are half a dozen, maybe more, that field of ascent technologies is connected somehow. It's not a coincidence that everybody's doing some kind of ascent techniques. And I think that the Merkavah tradition fits into those, whether it's the Hermetic ascent techniques, whether it's the Merkavah stuff, whether it is what's another good example? The Mithras liturgy is another example. These are all examples of that common field of ascent technologies. And the question is, how do we fit the Merkavah version of that ascent technology, that larger field of ascent technologies? What's the relationship of them? And the short answer is we don't know. No one knows. The data is inconclusive, disconnected, and yet there's no denying that everybody at that time period was doing some version of theurgy, all of it. So do I know much about Rosicrucianism? I know a little bit about Rosicrucianism, and I should say I know a little bit about Rosicrucianism, historical Rosicrucianism. I don't know much about contemporary Rosicrucianism as a spiritual path, but I've done some work on early Rosicrucianism. I need to come back and do an episode on the alchemical wedding and some other early Rosicrucian documents, but yeah, I have an episode on early Rosicrucianism. What happened to the third Lilith video? It's just not going to happen, probably. I just, I don't have any expertise. I might do a third video on anti-Lilith amulets through the early modern period, and kind of look at the amuletic, is that a word? Amuletic literature of sort of like what do we get in the amuletic literature, and like I might do something on that to get us into the early modern period. But Lilith doesn't go on to become a major character in Jewish literature after the Zohar. So after the in the Zohar, Lilith plays a pretty big role, quite contradictory role, but a pretty big role. But after the Zohar, Lilith doesn't play a big role in the mythology anymore. She's primarily just sort of a boogie woman. And most of the literature about Lilith after that is amuletic literature. It's just about, chutz Lilith, Adam Chava. It's about getting rid of her. And some of that literature could be interesting, but in terms of a 19th century Lilith revival episode, I don't think I'll do that. I think that's something that Angela Puka, Dr. Puka, could do. Angela is far better versed than me on contemporary stuff, and I think she'd do a better job at it. So if you want a third video about Lilith in the contemporary world, you probably want to ask Dr. Puka to do it, because I think that she's a far better fit in terms of content and expertise than I am. So I might eventually do a third video on Lilith, specifically on how she kind of lives on in the world of amulets. But and maybe a little bit about how she appears in some Mandean literature. She appears a couple times in some Mandean literature, but I don't think I'll do one on contemporary Lilith stuff, just because it's too far outside of my expertise. Bit of an aside, but thank you for your lessons. I've gotten into reading The Secret Revelation of John by Karen King, and it's incredibly profound. As a Christian, it feels intuitive to me. Cool. Coyote Monsoon. Yeah, I think the cool thing about living now in terms of being religious, whether it's Christian or whatever, is just having access to a much wider selection of scripture that makes some sense. And if the the Apocryphon of John makes some sense to you, then good, great. That's a fine thing. And I feel like having access to that kind of thing is great. But yeah, I'm glad you found this channel useful, and I appreciate that. And Karen King's a great scholar, aside from the fact that I think she got duped by the Gospel of Judas's wife. But hey, man, even monkeys fall from trees. Yeah, I appreciate that. This is really a really kind comment. Absolutely, it's my. I'm all about being able to make this stuff accessible, and I'm glad to have the opportunity to do so. Whatever, do an episode on voodoo and Santeria. Maybe, hoodoo and voodoo get right up to like the level of like 18th century stuff that I work on. I don't have any expertise specifically in I have no expertise in African spirituality and no expertise in African American spirituality. especially African American occultism, which is the whole world. I mean, that's like, you can think about everything from hoodoo, voodoo to like the Nation of Islam and like 5%, the 5%ers and stuff. And that's a fascinating world. And there's a book out recently about it. I think that's right. But yeah, maybe, it's funny because it's connected to the South where I'm from, the Southern United States. So it's the kind of thing that I am interested in, but background in a traditional African religion and hoodoo, voodoo and stuff. It's just I just don't know a lot about it, and I know nothing about it. And so it's this kind of thing where I feel like I would have to learn a whole lot to be able to produce content that would be worthy of those very important spiritual traditions. So it's the kind of thing where it's the kind of thing you don't want to halfway do that. You don't want to be the white guy talking about hoodoo and voodoo in some half-assed way. It's just completely unacceptable. So it's the kind of thing where I just don't feel like I have the expertise, and I would have to do a lot of work to get that expertise. And maybe that's a thing that I'll do at some point, but not on the agenda now, just because, like I said, I don't want to make something that I don't have a lot of expertise in. Yeah, this is a good question about the debate around Zoroastrianism and early Judaism. Email me. I don't have the articles just ready to hand. Random Heideggerianism. I don't have those articles ready to hand, but I do. I have them somewhere on my computer, and so I can point you in that direction if you're interested. But the main thing, right, is that what was assumed about Zoroastrianism in the 6th century BCE. It's two things. It's the big assumption is that Zoroastrianism was a state religion during the Babylonian exile. That's just shown to not be true. The second is, when did it become the state religion? Under the Persians. And the third thing is, we assume that Zoroastrianism had all of the elements of the apocalyptic already intact in the 3rd century, 4th century, 5th century BCE, and that also has just shown to not be true. So there's just a question of like the evolution of Zoroastrianism, and the question is, when did it influence Judaism, and what kind of Zoroastrianism was it when it did that? And I think that what's happening is now that Zoroastrian studies are getting a lot more highly developed, and we're getting a much more nuanced, much more careful picture of that. That's very much disrupting the idea that Zoroastrianism was a state religion that the Jews encountered in the 6th and 5th century BCE, and that the Zoroastrianism that we recognize now existed then, which is a silly thing to imagine because every religion changes dramatically over time. And to imagine that the Zoroastrianism of the Bundesane is going to be the same Zoroastrianism of the Gothas, and clearly that's just simply not possible. And so that's kind of what's going on with it. So it's a really important question, but I can take a look at it. I have not listened to the new Black Braid album, but I do have it on its way, and I just got the digital download. So I have not had the chance to listen to it, but I've heard the title, the single, and it's great. So it sounds like Black Braid. So I'm looking forward to listening to it. Getting back to the gym on Monday, so that'll be a really great opportunity to listen to the album while I'm at the gym on Monday. All right. A long-time watcher in the Detroit area. Is on the cult or esoteric scene around here? I have no idea. I don't know much about it here. I do know that there is an OTO lodge here, I think, that meets up did meet in the Theosophy building up in Royal Oak. I think it's in Royal Oak, but I don't know. I don't know anything about sort of contemporary esoteric Detroit. Although one of the things I do want to do is I want to do a tour of a lot of the old Mason sites that Crowley visited when he was here, that Kaczynski mentions in his book Panic in Detroit. I want to see, sort of what remains of what remains of the Crowley, the Detroit that Crowley visited when he was here. So that might be a fun thing to do, is to roam around and check out Crowley's Detroit. What's the most metal textual apocalypse end time scenario you've read up to this point? What's the most metal one? I mean, it has to be like the Stoic one, right? Where like everything just gets burned up. It's just like a final, the whole universe just gets swallowed in one giant fire, divine fire, no less. It's certainly where the Christians got it, the idea of the world purified in fire. It's pretty metal, I think. It's pretty metal. All right. What's my opinion of Dr. Dan McClelland's claim that there's no monotheism in the Bible, and the author of Deuter Isaiah has a monolater's view? There's two things I'll say about it. I think Dr. McClelland and I disagree about this, and also McClelland's the expert, and so I defer to him, right? Like, I hold my own beliefs. Like, I do think there's monotheism there, but also Dr. McClelland is the real expert in biblical studies, and I feel like if people are going to if people are going to trust the experts, they should trust Dan over me, even though I disagree with Dan. But I still think that at the end of the day, Dan is more entitled to his opinion than I am entitled to mine, by intellectual chops and by scholarship. And therefore, I would encourage people to say, if you had to choose between my position and Dan's position, I would encourage you to go with Dan's position, even though I personally don't follow it. Do you have any thoughts and opinions on video games and virtual online worlds? I don't have any strong opinions on video games. I'm thinking about making one. I've been thinking about making one for a long time. So I might be putting a call out for video game developers, anyone who's a video game developer. I might be putting out a call to make a video game. But no, I don't have any strong opinion one way or the other about them. I think that, they seem amazing. Video games seem amazing since I've played them. I think the last video games I played were like the Castle Troid games on like Game Boy Advance, where you're like, go through the, sort of the Castlevania Metroid style games, which I really like those. But it's just shocking how crazily amazing games look these days. But I have an idea for a game, like a retro style game, but that's another question, another project. But I do want to do that. I might put a feeler out for about that at some point. So at some point soon. All right, I'll keep scrolling down. All right, Dan. Yeah, you want to see the active intellect talk? Yeah, there's a whole book out just about the active intellect and like Averroes and Ibn Sina, and so it's like a lot. I mean, this idea had so much purchase that there's just so many places to have to go look in it. But yeah, an active intellect episode, it's definitely on the agenda. Definitely on the agenda. Recommended books for someone who follows a similar path to Rosicrucians and planetary magic. The only book that really comes to mind in terms of planetary magic is the just totally slipped my mind. The Arbitel. The Arbitel is sort of the granddaddy of all books of planetary magic. I mean, in many ways, there just is no non-planetary magic, and especially like Renaissance magic. It's kind of all bound up. Either you're dealing with demons or you're dealing with planetary spirits. And so most magic in the Renaissance is pretty bound up with planetary magic. From a practitioner point of view, you have people like Warnock and folks who are working in that world doing planetary magic. I don't know a lot about that, but I know that they've written like Christopher Warnock's written on that stuff pretty extensively. But really the only text that I know of about planetary magic that I focus on, it's old enough for me to work with, would be the Arbitel. I like these kind of like very hilarious invitations. Like if you can just reach out to me about my website, I don't know, it's hard to take that stuff seriously. Miss Mill, you and Kip Davis spoke about strange out there interpretations of Dead Sea Scrolls, Mishnah, and Talmud by scrutinizing words or phrases. Do you know any other texts, such as Greek works before 300 BCE, that do this besides Philo? The only text that I know of that like really does something like that is going to be like the Dervini Papyrus and some of the Orphic stuff, where they're really going to look at mythological texts through the lens of some kind of mystery cult. And so the Dervini Papyrus and some of the Orphic texts do something like this, but they're not that old. They're not 300, before 300 BC. They're not that old. So that would be the only ones that I know of. But also, the Greeks don't develop a commentary literature. They kind of all develop a commentary literature on the same time. So it's sort of like, none of them really developed it super early. But that's the only one I'm thinking of. It's a pity because the Stoics also wrote a lot of that literature, but it's all lost. The Stoics wrote a ton of literature attempting to like find secret meanings and underground meanings and mystical texts, and all of that literature is lost, sadly. Oh yeah, James the Strangerites. Yeah, Strangerites. He was also the king of Beaver Island here in Michigan for a while. He like had a theocracy on Beaver Island. So I do like the fact that like there was an LDS theocracy on an island in Michigan for a little while in the late 19th century. So that stuff is like just fascinating to me. All right, scrolling down, folks. A Lacanian, my mortal enemy as a Deleuzian. Deleuze got along with Lacan. It's Guattari that didn't. Guattari was the son that broke with Lacan. Deleuze, in fact, Lacan wrote very highly of Deleuze's book on masochism. In fact, it was Deleuze's book on masochism was what got Lacan's attention, and Lacan really made sure that book did really well. So I would say that if you're a Deleuzian, you shouldn't have much of a beef with Lacanians. But if you're a Guattarian, then you might. But I don't know. All this stuff with Anti-Oedipus. People make such a big deal of that book, and the older I've got, the less I'm impressed with the stuff that Deleuze and Guattari wrote together. I like Guattari on his own, and I like Deleuze on his own. Like, Difference and Repetition is one of the best pieces of philosophy written in the 20th century. But when they got together and they just generated, especially 1,000 Plateaus, it's just, I don't know, the book is, it's not a very good book. Not a good book. When I had a 9 to 5, how many hours did I read per day? My job in tech was really never 9 to 5. It was sort of like get your tasks done. So if we had tickets, we just had to get the tickets done. So I didn't have to work. And I was also finishing undergraduate, and I was doing like 16 hours of crazy in undergraduate. So it was just sort of like, it was never a 9 to 5. It was, tech. You just like wake up at 3 a.m. and randomly do data recovery on a broken RAID array or whatever. But no, I read constantly. I mean, I read constantly now, I read constantly then. the idea of just, I basically read till I'm exhausted, and then I watch videos on, assembly code, because there's something profoundly wrong with me. All right. I'd like to see a video on the Spherote and tarot connection. I would have to know anything about tarot cards. I don't know the first thing about tarot cards. Nothing. Like, I literally know that they began as a card game and then they became a divination tool. That is literally the extent of what I know about tarot. I know nothing at all about the history of tarot cards or divination by tarot. So I would have to know something about tarot to actually make a video about how the Spherote are mapped onto the tarot. But I don't know the first thing about it. I like the video on Bataille. That's great. I love that. Was a fun video to make. This is a place where I love to do these kind of videos on these 20th century philosophers. Because I like Bataille. I find Bataille fascinating. But and I just happen to have a lot of background with him. But yeah, maybe I'll do more episodes about those kind of characters. Yeah, thank you for the super sticker. Appreciate that. Thank you. Thank you. Aether Mechanics. Thank you. Oh, it's a great, huge super sticker. I appreciate this. I can already see the joke on the end, so I'll make sure to read it because you paid for it. Watched all your videos, DJ Sledge. I wish I were a DJ. I know you're the man as far as John D is concerned, but nothing yet on his studies into herbalism. When can we look forward to our first video on D's nuts? Did D write on herbalism? I don't know any text that D wrote specifically on herbalism. I do know about D's nuts though. So it's good. Actually, speaking of D's nuts, I'm actually writing a video this week in collaboration with Dr. Angela Puka on John Dee's wife and Edward Kelly's wife. Because no one talks about them. All they talk about them is that they talk about the wife swapping incident, and that's the extent of it. But Jane Dee was really an amazing woman. Joan Kelly was apparently a pretty amazing woman herself. And Edward Kelly's stepdaughter was an important poet who wrote poetry about alchemy and stuff. In fact, her poem, one of her poems, appears at the first printing of Oswald Kroll's Basilica Chemica. So Edward Kelly's stepdaughter was an important poet all on her own. So I'm going to be making a video on the ladies of Enochiana, all the Enochian ladies. So we'll be working on that. So, but thank you for your super stack. Thank you for your super question on D's nuts. I was going to say D's nuts all the rest of this stream. Okay. What works or authors should one be familiar with before reading Capitalism and Schizophrenia? This is the Deleuze and Guattari books. You need to read Lacan. The Anti-Oedipus is just an attack on Lacan. And this is what's weird, is that in graduate school, there were all these people reading Anti-Oedipus. And I was like, where are the Lacanians that you're so concerned with? There are no Lacanians here. They're like all in Argentina or something. Like Lacanianism is just not a thing that exists in this country. It's not an intellectual force. And therefore, why in the world would you care one way or the other about dismantling Lacanianism? Because it's just not a thing here. So it's one of these weird books that people read because it's like part of the intellectual fashion of the day. and we end up inheriting all these weird French biases and these French fights. And, like people down on Hegel because Deleuze was down on Hegel. Like, I don't care that Deleuze was down on Hegel. Doesn't matter what Deleuze thinks. He's just some guy. That we had to follow these weird late 60s intellectual fads as opposed to like, doing philosophy. So in many ways, I find that continental philosophy is detestable for many reasons. One of which is that it's so faddish and so fashionable. It's so fashion forward. Analytic philosophy is detestable for basically just being applied logic. But I do find that this element of continental philosophy to be just profoundly unphilosophical. And so in many ways, you can ask yourself, do you care about Lacanianism? And if the answer is, I don't know what Lacanianism is and I don't care about it, or I just don't care about Lacanianism, there's absolutely no reason to read Capitalism and Schizophrenia. Just totally not worth reading at all. But if you care about Lacanians like me, wild, these wild Lacanians, you may want to take a look at it. All right. Am I familiar with Final Fantasy VII? I quit playing Final Fantasy games right before 7. The last one I played was Final Fantasy 3, which I think is Final Fantasy 6 in Japan. So I never played Final Fantasy 7. But I do know that Sephiroth is a character, the bad guy, right? In there. So I have not played it. I have not played it. I love that Dan loves Time Cube stuff so much. It's the most bizarre Terrence McKenna stuff imaginable. It's like peak McKenna. Dan loves that stuff. Thank you for the super sticker. Is it true that Ficino was more interested in Zoroastrianism than Hermeticism? That's a good question for Dan. I mean, I don't know that he could have been that interested. I mean, there was no Zoroastrian literature for him to have access to. I think all they knew about Zoroaster at that point was kind of like he invented magic or something. But I don't know that Ficino had access. I don't know if there was any access to any Zoroastrian literature at all. Maybe the Chaldean oracles were associated with Zoroaster, and so he maybe had access to them. But yeah, I don't think he was terribly interested in Hermeticism, frankly. And I wonder what Dan thinks about this. I think when he translated the Hermetica, he was profoundly disappointed. I think he basically looked at it and thought it was going to contain something that it didn't. And I think he basically looked at it and was like, and, shelved the whole project. Because, as I point out in the video, the 1471 publication of the Corpus Hermeticum, it was a bootleg and it was incomplete and it's all messed up. The printers made mistakes. Ficino just left out whole sentences. I mean, there are whole sections of Corpus Hermeticum 3 that the Greek is just corrupt beyond any recognition whatsoever. And I think Ficino ultimately looked at it and kind of shrugged his shoulders and went on to greener pastures. And I think his greener pastures were ultimately Plato and Plotinus. And if you read the Platonic theology, which is a real slog, but if you read the Platonic theology, it's Plotinus all over that. And Dionysius and stuff like that. That's who he really is taken from. But I don't think the Hermetica really impressed him very much. But I'd be curious to hear what Dan has to say. I'm studying tarot, looking for a good resource to study alchemy. Yep, the best place to study alchemy, at least in my opinion, is I have a study guide you can find on my website. Study guide has a section on alchemy and has all the important books on alchemy. So you can definitely check out my recommendations. But basically, the place I would start is Principe's book, The Secrets of Alchemy. That's the best book to start with. Principe is just an amazing author. He's a great guy. He's just such a nice guy. I'm always so impressed when you meet people like Wout Hanegraaff and Principe and Peter Forshaw, Marco Passi. They're just nice people. They're just lovely people. I got to meet Dr. Terry Burns, who's a real expert, and John Dee as well. Just really sweet, kind, super smart, super kind, just lovely people. I'm so used in the philosophy world, the academic philosophy world, just so toxic. I mean, I went to 2 or 3 conferences in graduate school, and I just remember profoundly disliking the intellectual culture of academic philosophers. And I will say that the folks that I've met in the study of Western esotericism have just been overwhelmingly kind, decent, good people. You know, Angela Puka's just such a sweet person. Dan's a great guy. Just good people. And it's just like, it's so refreshing that when your colleagues, you like your colleagues, you respect them, you admire them, and you just like to be around them because they're lovely people. And I do not take that for granted in the least, because that is not a thing that many people can say. But I am very, very lucky in that, and very, very lucky in that way. Any good books on Jakob Böhme? Andrew Weeks is your guy. Any book by Andrew Weeks on Jakob Böhme is going to be good. Brill is putting out a bunch of books by Weeks on Burma, translating the Aurora. I think the Aurora is translated into a new translation in English. There's a collection of essays on Jakob Böhme out by Brill. Speaking of Brill, they're having their annual summer sale, which last year they gave 50% off, which means, you only have to mortgage your house twice to afford their damn books. This year they're only giving 40% off because they're Brill. But they are having their summer sale. It is 40% off. You can watch your bank account drop by an order of magnitude simply by buying 6 books from Brill. But we all have to do our part to support the Dutch economy. So go over there, go to Brill, buy some books, drink enough Jenever that you black out, so that when you hit the purchase button, you'll wake up all the poorer financially and all the richer in terms of literature. All right. Do I ever make it to Kentucky? I've never made it to Kentucky. I would like to make it to Kentucky, but I've never made it to Kentucky. I don't think, or driven through maybe, but hear that you guys got good liquor in them parts. So yeah, I'd love to get to Kentucky sometime. Sledge metal. Video games with mythological and esoteric breeding ground, teaching us learning while playing. Would that be cool or what? Yeah, this game I have in mind that I want to make would be sort of like that. It would be, well, I don't want to say what it is. Anyway, I have a game idea and I want to make a video game, and I want to work with someone to make this video game, and that's the thing I want to do. But yeah, thank you. Yeah, I'd love to make a esoterically grounded video game that is authentic to actual esoteric texts. Have you heard of an astrological document found amongst the Dead Sea Scrolls? Yes, there are lots of astrological documents found in the Dead Sea Scrolls. A couple calendrical documents, some astrological documents. There's a Brontologion, which is one of the coolest words ever. Brontologions has nothing to do with a dinosaur, unfortunately, but a Brontologion is it's a book of divination by which you can figure out what's going to happen in the future by what time it thunders and what kind of thunder it is and stuff. So there's a Brontologion. There's also a physiognomy book in the Dead Sea Scrolls as well. I did an episode on just the more esoteric books in the Dead Sea Scrolls if you want to check that out. Do I ever plan to do an episode on Luzzatto? Yeah, that would be cool to do an episode on Luzzatto. There's lots of Kabbalists that I would love to do videos on. I need to do a video on Cordovero, Luzzatto, Recanati, Flavius Mithridates, the wackiest of all the Renaissance Kabbalists. I'd love to do one on Flavius Mithridates. Yeah, it's a ton of folks I would love to cover. Just need to get around to it. The main thing that I'm waiting on at this point is that Malila Kellner Eshed is putting out her new introduction to the Zohar in English. I think it already exists in Hebrew, and I'm waiting for it to come out in English, and then I'm going to do an episode on the Zohar. So I feel kind of stuck doing more big Kabbalah episodes until I get that one done. So I want to wait for her thing to come out, do the episode on the Zohar, and then start marching forward in time, Gikatila and all that kind of stuff. Yeah, Luthien. Yeah, I was a Memphis grad. Yeah, I did my PhD there and graduated in 2014. I love Memphis. You know, I will say I had a fantastic time in Memphis. Memphis is a great city. I was sad to see the Memphis College of Art close. I think that's a real loss to the city. But yeah, spent a lot of time at the Lamplighter, at Otherlands. Miss those places. Still love those places. All right. Hey. Thank you for thank you for joining the Patreon. I really really appreciate the support. Just got added some stuff on Patreon specifically about Dead Sea Scrolls, looking at apocalypticism in the Dead Sea Scrolls. Most people don't realize just how much apocalyptic literature is in the Dead Sea Scrolls, and so we're taking a look at some of that before the upcoming lecture on Sunday about the Dead Sea Scrolls. But yeah, I appreciate your support and enjoy New Mexico. It's a beautiful state. It's a beautiful state. All right. Great questions today. Have you read Occult Feminism by Rachel Wilson? If so, thoughts? I've not read it. I have not read it. I should put it in the docket. But no, I've not read it. It sounds like more contemporary stuff, which I don't really do anything contemporary, so I can't really say. But interesting stuff. I mean, there's an episode I want to make, and this is like I call them sorties or forays. I kind of like emerge from my pre-modern world and then sometimes like jump at stuff that's a little bit more contemporaneous. And one of the episodes that I want to do that with is I want to do an episode on Florence Farr. Florence Farr is just a extremely fascinating woman in the Golden Dawn, and in many ways the development of the concept of a holy guardian angel really comes from her. She is really the intellectual foundations for much of what became the concept of the holy guardian angel. And I think that her and Layla Waddell and some other folks, but Florence Farr is really an intellectual powerhouse. So I'd like to do I think I want to do an episode specifically on Florence Farr at some point. But all right. This is Dan talking about the Zoroaster to be older than the Hermetica, so more priority in the Prisca Theologia. Yep, that makes total sense. That, you know, if he's older, he's pure. So therefore, you know, he's higher on the food chain. But he didn't have access to anything. I mean, the Chaldean oracles, right? That's like he didn't have access. The Gathas aren't translated until much later. Wandassin's not translated until much later. I can't imagine Ficino had any genuine Zoroastrian texts. Well, folks, it's Dr. Angela Puka. Yeah, folks, we're working on some esoterica stuff, some Enochian stuff. Dr. Puka is working on a very involved, very deep dive look at Enochiana after Dee and Kelly. And as I said, I'll be working on looking at Dee and Kelly's wives, who, like I said, don't really get a lot of attention outside of this lurid wife swapping stuff. But Jane Dee was a really incredible woman, and I'm really looking forward to talking more about her. So yeah, look forward to that next week, Dr. Puka. It's good talking to you. Good to see you. We have a representative of the Dutch people, Vera. Yes, we are here to support you via your economy via the purchasing of Brill books. We also appreciate your Genever, which also helps us to purchase said books, because if we did it sober, it would hurt so badly. So thank you for the SCOTUS episode a couple years back. Thank you. Yeah, that was a lot. That was an episode that I made totally on a lark. That's one of those episodes where I got up on a Monday morning and I was like, all right, what's the Esoterica episode this week? Because I have no idea. And I was like, I just do it on Dun SCOTUS. And I don't know why that made sense to me at the time. And then I wrote it, just wrote it all in one go. And it's like, this is a terrible idea. No one's going to like this. It's not that esoteric. It's really dense. SCOTUS is just like the laughing stock of, I mean, he's like everything that's wrong in some sense with the Middle Ages for people, some people. And but it went over well. People liked it. I'm glad they liked it. Yeah, I'd like to do more of that. I want to do an episode on Kuza's concept of learned ignorance. I think that's a very important concept. Certainly an important concept for Agrippa. And it's a byline and sort of the what Dan Trell has rightly called sort of the anti-Gnostic tendency, the not knowing, right? Gnosticism is a claim that you know, and there's a mystical tradition in the West of not knowing, the learned ignorance tradition that goes back to the negative theology of Pseudo Dionysius, and you find it in the idea of learned ignorance, and again you'll find something similar in Agrippa. So I think that we talk so much about Gnostic mysticism around here that I think that there is a kind of agnostic mysticism that is, in some sense, a much stronger historical form of mysticism in the West. And it would be cool to do an episode. Maybe Dan, if you want to do it, we can work on it together. Do a couple of episodes on agnosis. That gnosis is one mystical tradition, but the West really settled on agnosis as the mystical path. And there's great work to be done there. And like I said, Nicholas of Cusa and some other people. So maybe that's a thing we can work on at some point. But yeah, I definitely want to do that. Definitely want to do something like that at some point. Yeah. That's what I kind of figured, the Chaldean oracles, which are hilariously have nothing to do with Zoroaster, right? They're just like written by like Syrians. So, but fascinating stuff nonetheless. All right. Would I ever do a video on the religion of the Seleucids, or the Hittite Luwian religion? I actually had planned when you do a video on Yahweh and you kind of get this storm god bug, it did make me want to do a video on Teshub, the Hittite storm god. And then I was like, it'd be cool to kind of do a whole video on Hittite mythology, because it's relatively manageable. It's a relatively small corpus. But also what's interesting about the Hittites is that they are kind of the earliest examples of people doing religious studies. The Hittites would collect cuneiform tablets that of other religious traditions other than their own. And in fact, they even discovered a brand new Indo-European language that was previously unknown because of the Hittites gobbling all this stuff up. So there's a cool episode to be made on the Hittites, their kind of mythology, their curious tendency to collect other religious ritual literature, and also what connection do the Hittites have to the sort of broader Indo-European mythology, which we understand to significant degree via linguistics. So there's a cool question, or there's a cool Hittite video to be made, and I don't know when I'll have time to make it, but yes, the SBL, the Society for Biblical Literature, has put out a really great little reader of Hittite theology. So yeah, maybe I'll do one on Hittite theology and like Hittite, sort of religious interest, and then this sort of larger question of Indo-European religiosity more generally. All right. Yep, cataphatic versus apophatic, absolutely. Yep. El Shaddai Ascension of the Metatron, is a game based on the Book of Enoch. Immortal scribe Enoch sent by God to find 7 fallen angels and save humanity from a great flood triggered by the Council of Heaven. That's cool. Check that out. That is kind of what happened. I mean, Enoch was mostly there to condemn all the bad angels that went down and had sex with the ladies. But yeah, that's cool. There is actually a game based on the Book of Enoch, which makes total sense. I mean, that's Enoch is the easiest to convert into. Makes sense that we converted into a game. I believe in nothing supernatural, but love the content for more historically accurate inspiration for D&D and Magic. Hey, man, if you're watching, I'm appreciating it. I love D&D, love Magic. I am all about people coming here and learning about this material for writing books, doing D&D, their own spirituality, learning about history. I'm not picky, so I appreciate you watching and I appreciate you supporting the channel. You watched the interview with Gnostic Informant about my conception of post-theism. Yeah, once the channel gets to we hit the 1 million mark or whatever, which is a somewhat arbitrary number, one of the things I'm going to do is alter how I produce content so that I can begin writing more. And one of the things I want to write is a book on post-theism as a concept. And so yeah, that's the thing that is in the hopper. There's 2 or 3 books that I actually want to write that I kind of have written in my head. I just need to sit down and write them out. But one of them will be a kind of exploration of post-theism, which is kind of the name, the very tedious and pretentious name that I've given to kind of where I land vis-a-vis the question of about God, or about the God question. What's the origin of the name Metatron? Nobody knows. There's no agreement about it. The big one is Metatronos, like above the throne, beyond the throne. But why Metatron would have a Greek name? It's not. None of this is clear. So there's definitely no consensus. Definitely no consensus about about the name Metatron. Missed my second super chat. Oh, I'm sorry. Let me see. Sorry, folks. I was actually asking about strange word/phrase interpretations before 300 CE, not BCE. Does that add anything? The Stoics wrote stuff, like I said, but none of it survives. I'm trying to think of anything in the Greek tradition. It's Philo, obviously. I mean, his tortured analysis of the Hebrew Bible. But nothing's immediately jumping to mind. That's kind of a commentary-like analysis of words. Nothing's jumping to mind specifically, aside from Philo. But like I said, nothing's surviving. I mean, we know the Stoics were reading allegorical stuff like that, writing stuff like that, but it's all lost. some good journals on Western esotericism. Aries, a journal focusing on the Dead Sea Scrolls. I'm sure the SBL, like the Society of Biblical Literature, will probably have a journal focusing on that. On Dead Sea Scrolls stuff, but I don't know of anything specifically about that. There's Connections, which is another one on esotericism. There used to be a journal called Esoterica, but that doesn't. It's defunct now. But those are all the ones that I know of. No, it's not Connections. Correspondences. That's the name of it. Correspondences. So those are the ones that I know of. How does a guy get a beard like that? You have to buy one. This is a Costco beard. It's a Kirkland brand beard. So you can get it at Costco. I like the Costco brand. It's a little less expensive than, and a little bit better quality than the Walmart beards. So that's where I would get it. What do I think about the idea that Jesus was partially related to the Essenes? I'm going to be doing an episode on Jesus actually just pretty soon. I'm going to do one the week after this one. I don't think Jesus was connected to the Essenes. And the reason why I don't think that he was connected to the Essenes is because two things. One, his belief in baptism was that he gets his belief in baptism from his cousin, John the Baptizer. And his belief is that baptism was for the remission of sins. There's no evidence that the Essenes believe that. The Essenes believe the more traditional view that it was for ritual purity. Secondly, Jesus was pretty liberal when it came to Sabbath observance, and that would have not jived at all with the Essenes. So he would have not been okay. The Essenes would not have been okay with that. Also, it seems like that the Essenes were primarily a priestly oriented cult, which is to say they were concerned mostly about the restoration of them into the temple. They wanted to be reestablished in the temple and ultimately usher in a kind of apocalyptic temple religion. Jesus had no interest in that. So that's not the way that's not his belief. So so in general, the Essenes and Jesus are quite dissimilar. They're quite dissimilar. I don't think that I think the Essenes would not have approved of him, and I think that he would have found them too temple-ish. That was not his thing. Compared similarities between Star Wars and the Klepote, I have no idea. I mean, like the Sith are the bad guys, and the Klepote are like the bad parts of the lower Sephiroth. Yeah, I don't know. I will say that the best thing that Star Wars has ever produced was Andor. I really, really like Andor a lot. Andor was amazing. I think like basically Empire Strikes Back and Andor are basically the only Star Wars stuff that I like. And in Rogue One, obviously, but I don't know much about Star Wars mythology aside from that. No, I'm not familiar with this writer. I'll have to take a look at it. No, you should, Josh. You should. Yeah, there's so much bad. I mean, the new. Yeah, I did not like any of the new Star Wars stuff. It was terrible. But I will say that Andor is fantastic. Really, 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 really good. Really good. All right, I thought I saw another question up here just a second ago. Query about the revitalization or possible renewal of Freemasonry as an esoteric practices. Any suggestions? I'm not a Freemason. I don't know much about Freemasonry. So I'm not really the person to answer this. I would say that if you're interested in esoteric Freemasonry, I would talk to Ike Baker. Ike Baker is in that world and would know more about that, especially from a practical point of view than I do. But I don't have any. I don't know a lot about Freemasonry. I'm not a Mason. It's Freemasonry is a bit late in terms of what I study, and therefore I just don't know a lot about Freemasonry. So I can't really help you here. I'm sorry. All right, folks. Oh, Ambix. Yeah, of course. How did I forget about Ambix? Ambix is a great journal that covers the history of chemistry and alchemy, of course. Ambix is fantastic. I wish it were more accessible. Ambix can be a very difficult journal to get actual journal articles out of, but no, an absolutely great one. Looking for a mod for the Esoterica subreddit. Actually, yeah, maybe. If maybe I don't want to mod it at all. But if someone wants to mod it, as long as you kind of keep it up to snuff, I could be interested in someone modding the Esoterica subreddit. That'd be fun. I'd like to open it back up. But yeah, if you're interested in that, let me know. Any producers of alchemical glass? The only people that I know that I've worked with that produce alchemical glass is Historic Glassworks. That's who I bought my alembic from. Like I said, there's also a glass maker who works with Dr. Lawrence Principe, and I'm getting him custom. He's customizing some glassware for me. But those are the only places I know of that do historically accurate alchemical glassware. So. Would you have any recommendations for a source where one can read about logical or mathematical concepts in the context of various mystical and religious traditions? Is there a single good book that does this? No, I can't think of a single book that does just the history of mathematics and logic in the context of mystical traditions. This would be a great book to write. Someone should write it. But I don't know of a specific book that does that. There's a couple of, there's not really anything. Nothing's jumping to mind immediately. Because I would love to read that book. Because there's just all kind of interesting stuff. Gödel and his interesting theological stuff. How in Cantor and his like sort of Aleph and infinity and all that. There's a huge intersection here between mathematics, logic, and mysticism. That would be a great book to write, but I don't know of anyone who's written a book like that. It would be fantastic. Free time. That's a fascinating idea. I've heard myths about free time. Rumors. I've heard about this. I think that it's more likely that God exists than free time exists. I was wondering, I know you did something on the wise men or the Magi. Yep. Anything on old Arabia that could give insights onto who he was? I had a visit from Balthazar in recent months. Balthazar the Magi. I know that Philip Holm over at Let's Talk Religion has done a couple of really good videos on pre-Islamic Arabian religion. But I mean, I think the Magi and the Gospel of Matthew are mythological. I don't think that I don't think that they were. I just don't buy that entire Bethlehem story. Basically, I don't think that that if Jesus were born in Bethlehem, he wasn't visited by Magi. I don't think, I'm even skeptical he was even born in Bethlehem, frankly. And if he were born in Bethlehem, I think it probably had more to do with the fact that Mary was pregnant out of wedlock, and they were living in a very small village in the Galilee. And basically, in order to hide the shame of having a child basically out of wedlock, she may have went to live with her family, her extended family, um, her sister Martha, and in the Bethlehem area. And so it could have been the case that because Jesus' birth was illegitimate, basically she just couldn't give birth in Nazareth, and therefore moved south, gave birth there, and eventually came back. But I just don't know that. I doubt that Jesus was even born in Bethlehem. I would suspect he was born in Nazareth or Sepphoris or somewhere up there. Still not sure why Lilith came into existence because of the problem in Genesis. What is the Genesis issue? It's just there seem to be two creation stories. I mean, there are two creation stories. Three creation stories, actually. There's another creation story in Psalm 74. But there's two creation stories. And what ends up happening is you have to sort out what those are. Also, maybe I will do another video on Lilith, because one of the things I think people get really badly wrong about the Lilith story is that the Lilith story in the alphabet of Ben Sirach wasn't meant to be taken seriously. It's the whole alphabet of Ben Sirach was written by someone lampooning the rabbis and lampooning the fact that the rabbis are making up a bunch of stuff. And so the alphabet of Ben Sirach is basically making fun of the rabbis by doing what that text thinks the rabbis are doing. It was never meant to be taken seriously, even as a myth. It was always meant to be kind of silly. And so it's so funny that this mythology around Lilith became taken so seriously, even though it was originally written as satire by the whoever wrote this. So it's a weird kind of story that people misunderstand because they've lifted it out of its historical and literary context and then ran with it. That's lots of people. So it's a specifically there's a specific set of misunderstandings about that story that are somewhat hilarious, like most historical misunderstandings are. I've never seen Full Metal Alchemist. Never seen it. The last anime that I ever watched was with my profoundly good friend Russell, and it must have been like Macross Plus, like Ninja Scroll, like way back in the 90s. So I have not seen any anime since then. Yeah, I think Macross Plus and like Ninja Scroll and stuff was the last stuff that I saw. All right, folks. Oh yeah, Robotech. Yeah, I'm a Robotech. Yeah, no, I'm like yeah, it's like amazing how like I haven't watched. Yeah, also just animes, like they're so long. Like these series go on for years. I don't see how anyone possibly can watch all that stuff. Like I just don't have. I barely have time to like work in like a show a week. Watching wise, right? I might watch 2 shows. Like it took us months to get through Andor, just because we just like it's so difficult to find time to watch shows. But there's just no way I could like watch 26 episodes of some show. I can do I just don't have the time. There's no way I would have the time. All right, folks. Well, I am going to call it. It's been on here for about 2 hours almost. Any last minute questions or super thanks or super questions? Feel free to put them in. I like this one. This is great. Oops, that's the wrong one. Sorry. Yeah, free time is a Freemason hoax. Is a hoax. Yeah, I believe it. I zero time to do this. Yes, I would love to do an episode on Gamethos Plethon and his Hellenic revival. Yeah, this is a topic I'm really interested in. You know, one of the things that I want to do a lot more of next year is I'm really want to do a lot more on Renaissance esotericism. Renaissance esotericism is the most slept on esotericism. It doesn't get nearly the respect it deserves. It is so profoundly important that it just doesn't get studied. And I really want to do a deep dive on, Ficino, Pico, Candelo Bornogo, the folks that Dan knows a ton about, and I'd love to work with Dan on these. But yeah, definitely want to do some deep dives. I want to do some stuff on Ficino's commentaries on Plato. So yeah, they really want to get that stuff done. So. I mean, the Essenes, they were largely celibate, so that would be unlikely. And the Therapeutae were not. They only, if they existed at all, they only existed in Egypt. And I just don't think there's any evidence that Jesus went to Egypt. I think that whole flight to Egypt story is just mythology. No, Jesus was probably born and raised in the Galilee, and ultimately died in Jerusalem. But yeah, and maybe, like I said, went to live with his cousins and his aunt in Jerusalem, but not for any special reason, but mostly out of shame that Mary was pregnant with not Joseph's child. Now, who got Mary pregnant is a big question, but yeah. Anyway, I'll be exploring these topics on my episode on Jesus. Thank you, Frank Copeland. I really appreciate. I'm glad that the videos have been helpful getting you ready for a master's in magic and occult sciences. Good for you. Cool that you're doing that. I wish you the very best on your master's degree. Good for you, man. That sounds fantastic. Sounds like a great time. Where are you going? Are you going to Exeter? Is that are you doing the one in South Carolina? I'd be curious to know where you're doing it. Could Merkavah's use of sacred anointing oils hint at mandrake or other tropane plants well-known antiquity for risky visions? So the Ascent's deadly warnings preserve real pharmacological dangers in sacred text. I don't think so. I mean, I think that the very rarely is there even anointing oil mentioned, and every single time where we actually have an Ascent praxis mentioned, it never mentions using any of these, any ingesting anything. In fact, it's very clear that the one thing that the praxis shares in common is that fasting is what matters. Long fasts, really long fasts. So I think that not only is there no evidence of them ingesting any sort of psychotropic drugs, but the best evidence we have of the praxis is it involved not ingesting anything. So my suspicion is that there's no evidence of the use of psychotropic drugs in the Merkavah literature, because they tell us how they do it. They tell us how they did it, and it doesn't involve any of that stuff. How do you take Ozzy dying? Oh man, Ozzy, a blessed memory. It's super sad, it's it's super sad, but the one thing I will say, the many things that one can say about Ozzy is that Ozzy is a real, for like a working class person like me, Ozzy's a real hero, because he's like a working class Manchester kid who, with his friends, one of which gets injured in a factory accident and has to like down tune his guitar and like change how he plays because of a factory, and smashed his finger, cut his finger off. Um, that that out of this working class, um, Manchester group of kids, some of the most entire genre of music is born. And again, as a working class kid, that's just like a thing to celebrate. So Ozzy is just is a person that I the Manchester equivalent of me, that could have been my uncle or something. And the fact that he and Black Sabbath pioneered an entire genre of music that means so much for people. That is very class conscious music. I mean, you listen to War Pigs, and that is a class conscious album. That is like an anti-war class conscious album. And I just find Ozzy just to be a genius, and the world is certainly worse off without him. But thank God that he left behind such a giant repertoire of music that we can all enjoy. And man, when the day passed, I was put on. I have the record, the actual record, Black Sabbath. And I put it on, and me and my kids listened to it. And so that was, I'm sure, the first time my kids had ever heard Black Sabbath. And so it's great to know that we have his music, we have his genius, and we could throw the record on and introduce a new generation of kids to working class genius in the form of Ozzy's music. All right, folks. Well, was he from Birmingham or Manchester? All right, I forget. I don't know if anyone saw it, but Jack Black's cover of Mr. Crowley, not Mr. Crowley, Mr. Crowley, is great. If you get the chance to watch Jack Black's cover of Mr. Crowley, it's fantastic. Oh, he's from Birmingham. A Brummie, I think they call him, like the Peaky Blinders people. He's from Birmingham. But yeah, so yeah, like the Peaky Blinders. I hear that English people don't like the way people from Birmingham talk. That they don't like this accent, that this Birmingham accent apparently grates on people, but I can't tell the difference half the time. All right, folks. Well, I'm going to get going. I appreciate everyone's taking the time to hang out with me. And, again, let's really appreciate this community. I appreciate hanging out with folks. I was hanging out with folks in office hours on the Patreon, and just amazing people, just lovely, amazing, thoughtful, deeply caring people. And just really, I really appreciate being in the crowd of those folks and of you guys. And I really appreciate being able to make this content. I really appreciate being able to do this kind of work. So thank you all for making that possible. I'm gonna go get ready for some Shabbat. I'm just gonna take a little nap, I think. But if you observe the Shabbat, the Shabbos, I hope you have a great Shabbat. Shabbat Shalom. I hope everyone has a great weekend. Check out the conversation I did with Dr. Litwa, and I'll be back next week with an episode on the Enochian ladies, Jane D and Joanna Kelly. And then after that, we're doing the episode on JC, Josh of Nazareth. So I'll tell you, I'm looking forward to that one. But at any rate, guys, thank you so much for making this possible. And I'll see you all soon. Definitely see you next week for the Merkavah class. So thank you, guys. You guys have a great afternoon, a great evening, and good night.